the dignity of women.
Right. Not long ago, there was a case in Bath where allegedly a pharmacist had given his girlfriend, his fiancée, I forget what the situation was, an abortifacient. And it actually occurred in Pennsylvania. So there were charges able to be brought. But you can imagine if this kind of law was passed in New York, not only do we not have protections for unborn victims of violence, but we'd totally be removing even the possibility of down the road protecting those innocent children in the womb from this kind of an action. And, we haven't even touched on parental rights yet. Mm-hmm. Once you establish this fundamental right, if a 13-year-old girl wants to go into a school-based health center or to a pharmacist and get some kind of an abortifacient, which some women have died from taking this from internal bleeding, that minor could get that without parental notification or parental consent. Mm-hmm. And I think that as a parent, I ought to have a say over the medication that my child is taking. My children cannot get aspirin in school, but they could get an abortifacient. That's the problem, that when people see how radical this piece of legislation is, it doesn't move. The State Assembly, as I'm sure most of your listeners are aware, is a very liberal chamber here in New York, controlled by mostly downstate Manhattan mentalities. And the State Assembly did not even have a sponsor for this bill until a few weeks ago. It's been around for a couple of years now, 3 years. And there wasn't even a sponsor in the State Assembly until just a few weeks ago. That's how radical this bill is.
Well, and how come people aren't aware of this? I mean, we haven't heard anything about this except for perhaps on WLEA. We don't see it on our local news. We don't, again, you have to always, it seems like you have to seek out the internet and talk radio to hear what's going on in the legislative body of New York State. You're more hands-on, you're seeing this stuff. How aware are people in New York State as to how, as you said, how radical a majority of our legislators are in the state body?
Well, I think that, there's a couple of things in play here. When we look at all the polling across the state, obviously everybody is ticked off the legislature, and the attitude, although I don't ascribe to throw the bums out, that's often what I hear is throw everybody out. But then you drill down. You say, well, what about your guy? And certainly,
my guy's fine, they'll say.
My guy's fine, exactly. I'm in one of those rare districts where I've had a phenomenal senator. I think Senator Dale Volker has done a great job. He is retiring. He's been there a long time. And so we'll be working to get a conservative to replace him, but in most districts, you can't say that. And I say, go back to the voting record, all right? If your guy is so good, then how has he been on these issues? How has he been on the budget? Has he spoken out on these things? And has he taken action? It's one thing to have a press conference. It's quite another thing to follow it up with action. And so I think that, every constituent, every voter in this state needs to go back and not listen to the stump speech, but they really got to look to see what your legislator has accomplished in Albany. If they're voting for this budget this year, $135.7 billion, a growth over last year's budget in the difficult time that we're in, every legislator that votes for that budget needs to be replaced. It is a terrible budget, and it's pretty cut and dry for me. You look at the voting record.
Do you find that there's still quite a few Republicans who are voting for these budget bills?
Well, for the budget bills, they have not been. 1 week they did provide a vote for an extender bill to keep the continuance of government, but as of this year and last year, we did not have Republicans that were voting for the budget bills. So I think that's something to hone in on. And understand that I'm not just for all Republicans, and I don't want to make it a partisan issue.
Nowadays, yeah.
No, I'm looking for people that really stand up for the values that I believe in. And unfortunately, in New York State, so many of even what we call Republicans would be a Democrat anywhere else in the country. And so we are going to look at the issues. But I'll tell you something. We've seen in guys at the federal level, like Bart Stupak, when they call him a blue dog Democrat, they cave when the pressure's applied.
Obviously,
I at least recognize that the leadership at the top has to agree with me on some core values, because if the leadership at the top of that party does not agree, it's not likely that those underneath that chain of command are going to line up with me in any strong way when the vote is needed.
Right. Do you think, I'm thinking, just in the past few years, I'm really feeling like people are waking up. You've got the Tea Party movement, and you've got, the rallies at 9/12 and all these different things going on, and people are people are starting to wake up. As you said, the whole throw the bums out issue, whereas, even 5-6 years ago, I don't think people were, as you said, even aware of the voting record of their representative, doing research, every bill, how did you vote? I think that's changing, and, like you said, even with the pro-life movement, I've found that I think we're on a different trend where a lot of the people that are involved in the pro-life movement right now, are young people. They're teenagers and college kids, and young families in their 30s. So I think there's hope, but in New York State, it's tough to find. As I said, it just those 3 bills just in the past month or so. And every one of them, as you've mentioned, were not even, just a specific sponsor come out and saying, here, this is what I want, here it is. You've got RHA where, as you said, no one would sponsor it for 2-3 years. It was there in text and you could find it on the internet, but no one would officially bring it to the floor. You've got the gay marriage issue where they knew they couldn't just come out and ask us if we would approve of gay marriage being legal in New York State, so they stuck it into budget bills. And then another issue that I've found was just brought up in this past month that you and I touched on before we started the interview, was the gun laws that they sneak them out and they release press releases and they put them on the internet of all these different gun laws that they want to pass, and the microstamping bill that they tried to. They brought it to the floor for a vote. It did not pass, and you can share with the audience what happened after that.
Yeah, I was sitting actually right over the floor watching that unfold, and what in essence had happened was Mayor Bloomberg, Mayor of New York City, came to the Capitol lobbying for this bill, and he throws a lot of cash around. And so he got the floor vote that he wanted. It came to the floor, and it almost passed. It was very, very
right.
close. The Senate held the vote open, and when they realized that they were going to lack the votes they needed, they quickly withdrew the bill, which rather than allowing it to go down in flames and be defeated, they reserved the right to bring it back.
It's just,
we ought to be very troubled that it even got to the floor in New York State.
Yeah, and it doesn't even matter what side of the issue you're on in these cases. It's just the sneakiness is just really disturbing. We've run out of time, Jason. I want to thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. Let's be back with you again.
Okay, thanks so much, and we encourage people to visit your website. It's nycf.org or com?
.info, but it's even easier to remember, albanyupdate.com.
albanyupdate.com. Thanks a lot, Jason.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Amy McManus Show.